Hi, everybody. Welcome to this Act Now seminar that is specifically about how the breaking bread phenomenon came about here in Oklahoma City. It's good to see all of you. And right off the top, I'd like to say that if you have questions or if you want to reach me after the fact, there are a few ways you can do that. My email address is jcmiddendorf@gmail.com. I'm sure we can make that a part of the notes that can be a part of the rebroadcast, I guess, of this event. But jcmiddendorf@gmail.com. I'm available on Facebook. I think there's only one of me. So would love to talk with you and keep the conversation going if you would like. So this is today about how breaking bread became a thing in Oklahoma City. And so I'm actually going to share my screen now so that you can see some of what I am talking about as I talk about it. Um, so let me make sure I'm doing that right. All right. Can you guys see that? That good? Okay. So it all kind of started a long time ago when a guy by the name of Clay Bennett, who actually owns the Oklahoma City Thunder, brought a group of people together to ask the question, why don't more people come to Oklahoma City? Why don't more people move their businesses to Oklahoma City? And after studying it for quite a long time and inviting some outside experts to come in and to survey our landscape, he determined that at least one of those causes was because we have a pretty desperately broken criminal justice system. And so then we spent another few months exploring just how this system was broken. And then after exploring it for a few months, then it was time to roll out the messaging and how it is that we're going to try, at least try, to change things in the hopes of luring more people and more confidence, more people to Oklahoma City and increasing the confidence of our citizens. So I'm actually was a part of the group that was assigned to spread the word to the religious community. I'm a pastor by trade, and so it made some sense for me to be part of that effort. And so our first task was to tell people about our county jail, which is a historically broken place. If it's possible to be architecturally unjust, our county jail is architecturally unjust. And so we started at that point saying, hey, this isn't the whole issue, but this is sort of an example, almost a metaphor of what ails us throughout the system here in Oklahoma. And so a couple of friends of mine, the three of us started taking people through tours of the jail. And we would take folks on a tour of the jail. And then we would take them out for lunch and discuss how the jail is, in fact, symptomatic of a larger problem. And then we would take them to a different experience, somewhere that does restoration and renewal as opposed to the punitive stuff that we have seen at the jail. So we would go to an employment agency, or we have gone to drug court to see how they do their thing, or a place called Remerge, which actually takes women with children out of the jail population and resources them and restores them and gives them a car if they don't have one, a place to live if they don't have one, a job if they don't already have one. So as to say, hey, it's broken, but there are already some systems and processes in place whereby we could fix this broader thing. But the longer that we did that, the more we recognize, hey, we have some other issues that we need to talk about that are somehow underneath the jail, that when they spring up to the surface, it looks like the jail. And so we started asking, well, how are we going to have this discussion about race, institutional bias, and poverty, and how the system seems to be tilted against those people who don't have the means to pay for the justice that they deserve. And so we started to dream about an event. And so we had an event. And the first one that we had, we actually hosted at our place at our church, and it was called Just Love. And the mayor came, and the head of DHS, the Department of Human Services, came, and we had people around tables to have this discussion. And we felt like it went pretty well. It wasn't great. And then we got the idea from one of the elder statesmen in our city. It's a man by the name of Pastor John Reed, who has been at his church, Fairview Missionary Baptist, for about 60 years. And he said, I want us to talk about race and race and how it contributes to this discussion on a broken criminal justice system. And so the idea for the first Breaking Bread seminar came to be, the first Breaking Bread experience, it came to be. And so on March the 12th in 2020, we actually had our first Breaking Bread. And there's my friend Lee Rowland, who was there and a part of the whole thing, the Justice Circle. And we now partner with ACT now, but at this point in March 12th of 2020, we didn't really have a partnering agency. We just had a meal. We had breakfast. And we had Mr. Bennett come from the Thunder. And we had about 250 people. And I think we would have had more. But the night before is when the pandemic sort of launched onto the big screen, especially in Oklahoma City. We had a basketball game that was canceled. And then the center on the opposing team, named Rudy Gobert, who is still an enemy in Oklahoma City, came out and he was making fun of the disease and touched all of the microphones. And sure enough, the whole world shut down after that. But that morning before it shut down, we had an incredible conversation about all kinds of things. And this is one of the pictures that depicts sort of the spiritual true north of what it is that we're trying to do at these Breaking Bread events. These are two people, as you can tell, who are different in a lot of ways, different in a whole lot of ways. But the magic at every Breaking Bread event, and this includes that first one, was not so much what happened in the heart of the young man on the left or the older woman on the right. The magic of the Breaking Bread is what happens between them when they get together, when they share stories, when they share names, when they care about the plight of the other. And that is what we're trying to do with our Breaking Bread event. All right, I'm going to try to play this 90-second highlight reel video just to give you more of an idea of what it looks like. And if it doesn't work, I will pivot so quickly to the next slide. Here, let's give it a shot. The Justice Circle is a gathering of faith and community leaders, and we are designed to do just this, to gather people together for the purposes of conversation and collaboration and breakthrough. We want to create change via conversation and friendship.
To strengthen the bonds between diverse members of our Oklahoma City community. It is our hope that friendships will be formed during our discussions, which have become hallmark for every Breaking Bread event.
We're much stronger and much better together, learning more about these stories. Eyes will be open, and that more people would be a little bit more understanding to this community.
Incredible experience, full of joy and pride that more people are willing to listen to our story.
We're really excited to be able to offer our perspective and voice, provide an antidote for unfamiliarity.
I believe relationships are the key to solving so many major problems in our city, especially when it comes to race.
In building those relationships, you learn that you're actually facing those same tough experiences that they're going through. It makes me feel like I'm not alone.
When we start to understand each other better, that's when we'll start developing relationships, long-lasting relationships.
Being a small solution to a huge problem.
Make sure that you exchange numbers, that you meet up for coffee, that you invite each other into each other's space.
In the friendships that are birthed in these conversations, we can then start to make real changes and real differences.
Yeah, that video needs some updating. We all looked a whole lot younger then, but still doing the work. And now we are 10 events in, and we have had 5 with on our African American community. We've had 3 with our Latino community and 2 with our Asian community. And finally, after years of effort, we will have our first with the Native American community on November 12th. Of this year. So we are headed down that road with lots of ideas on how to go from here to there. But here I've got a few statements I want to put out in front of you that I think are crucial to our understanding of what it is that we're trying to do. And here's the first statement I would make. It all starts with the right kinds of conversations. Talking, we recognize talking will never be enough. But for us, it had to start right there. It had to start with getting people around the table and prioritizing the conversation that people would have. But here's where we went from there. We studied our community. We learned all that we could about the problems as they were in each corner of our community. And we paid particular attention to the people and the organizations that were parts of the problem or parts of the solution. And we determined that we would partner as best we could with the solutions people. And we determined that we would make relational connections with the problem people. And by the way, not all the problem people necessarily know that they're the problem people. They're just doing the best they can as well. Many, with the purest of intentions, are doing their jobs, and also in many cases are aware of the same issues that we are mobilizing to address. At the very same time, we sought out resource partners, partners who caught the vision of what we were trying to do, who understood the project and considered us to be worth the investment. And to this day, so 4 years in and 10 events later, we have not lost a sponsor. They are still giving us on an annual basis the money that we need to have these events that always feature a meal, that always cost us something in terms of a venue that we have to rent, and also cost us something in terms of the programming. And these people have made all of this to get all of this possible each and every year. In fact, the Thunder were so interested. The Thunder were our first donor, and they are so interested in this first American event that they have gone ahead and given us an additional donation to make sure that we can afford to have this first American event. So what you have to do if you're going to have a Breaking Bread initiative in your area, you have to make sober assessment of your context. You got to know what your issues are. You got to know who the players are, and you need to have some idea of what the possibilities might be. Something I need you to know is that when we go to these different ethnic corners of the city, we don't go to them with a preconceived idea of what the discussion needs to be about. We allow them to tell us what platform, what conversation they want us to platform at the Breaking Bread event. So knowing that our original and organizing leadership team found energy and hope in our diverse connections and growing friendships, we decided to explore how connection and friendship might impact the broken systems around us. So what if we invited people to gather around tables, we said, to share this meal, learn names and stories, and discuss broken systems? We knew that these table conversations would necessarily include both our kindred spirits and those who, for one reason or another, were on the problem side of the ledger. We literally, at the beginning of our effort, we literally made lists of the people who really needed to be there, whether or not we really wanted them to be there. And we were largely successful in gathering both the solutions and the problem people to our events. On the day of the event, then, we determined that we would arrange seating to ensure diversity at every table. And this is where Donna Thompson comes in, and she just does heroic work. And I have described this woman to you guys as someone who is the most kindly, terrifying people I have ever been around. And when you walk in, she tells you where you're going to sit, no questions asked. And not everybody was pleased to be separated from the folks that came with, but then no one has ever refused. And this is a crucial step. And this is crucial to the whole Breaking Bread event. You need to plan to connect with your friends and your allies. And just as importantly, you need to plan to connect with your enemies, your opposites, and your irritants. Very important. Next, and now you've heard me mention it a couple of times, we knew that food was going to be crucial. People don't often volunteer to sit down and eat with their enemies. But this was and continues to be a free event, and sharing a meal shapes the conversations that will take place at this table. We decided to have every meal catered by a local chef who would catch the vision of our project. And the meal has provided the ethos and the fuel and the context and the playing field for the conversations that we're going to have. We were and are continue to be determined to tell the unvarnished truth. We do that at our meetings. We just had one of those meetings yesterday, and we do that at every one of our Breaking Bread events. And we know that this is going to be challenging, and sometimes more challenging than at other times. Touching open wounds is always a challenge. Take that from a preacher. But we told the truth in a variety of ways through testimonials and presentations, which utilized scientific methods and provided measurable results. We have had crafted video presentations from trusted voices. Then, having heard the issues, having eaten the meals, and having provided table discussion questions that would again touch the wounds, we were off and running. We have often said that the stars of the show, no matter who's on the program, the stars of the show are the cringy questions that we put in front of people for their table discussions. We are practicing around the table the very skills that we'll need when we leave these tables and re-enter the broken systems around us. So it's really important that you have a trained table host that can facilitate the conversation. And we also try to have scribes at every table to take good notes that we are in the process of turning over to Act Now, by the way. So tell the cringy truth. Tell the cringy truth about the issues that are confronting, afflicting your area, this particular part of your city, this particular community. You have to tell the cringy truth and then trust that empathy and understanding will have some sort of say. Will have some sort of say. When the presentations and the conversations go well, we have found that it generates lots of passion and energy. We have not always been good at harnessing that energy or that passion. We are getting better and better at it. I would say that it's becoming increasingly important that we learn how to. This is something else that we're hoping that Shelley Henson can help us with. We do provide resources to facilitate the ongoing conversations, and hopefully those are ongoing friendships. We get up at the end of every Breaking Bread event, and it's been Lynn at times, it's been another one of our Justice Circle board members at times who gets up and says something like this: we know that the success or failure of a Breaking Bread event is not going to be determined on the day of the event. It will be determined by the number of people, the number of groups that get together to continue the conversation so that we can start to seed the ground with the possibility of change, seeding the ground with the possibility of change. Now, we have done some other things, and we do hope to do some more things that will harness this energy and give our people somewhere to point this energy. So in the past, we had one event in the northeast part of town that was suffering a rash, a wave of gun violence. And we helped bring to town a group called Live Free. Live Free had demonstrated that they knew how to bring down the gun violence rate in Oakland, California, and they were interested in spreading this word around the nation. And we raised our hand and said, well, we think that we're a candidate for you. And so we brought Pastor Mike, who leads Live Free out in Oakland. We brought Pastor Mike in for a Breaking Bread event. He was our speaker. He brought all kinds of good statistics with him. He brought a nice video presentation, and we provided the meal and the tables and then those cringy table questions. And after that, Pastor Mike and a few of us were able to sit down with the mayor and the city manager to say, hey, this has worked there, and we would like for you to know that we think it can work here. And we know that you're not ready to write a check for it today, so we have helped to raise some funding so that it will be here for the next year. And I just yesterday was at a press conference where they were able to announce that they have dropped the rate dramatically. Gun violence in the northeast side of town has dropped dramatically, and there are, as of July 1st, yesterday, no unsolved murders in the northeast part of town, and that is remarkable. That's something that we've never been able to say. And at least part of that is because the Justice Circle insisted that we have this cringy conversation in the northeast part of town, because they asked us to platform this conversation about gun violence and potential solutions to an epidemic problem. And so we're proud to have had some role in that longer conversation. And we are trying right now to have a greater role in a conversation about immigration. We have a large percentage of our populace who is from Spanish-speaking countries around the world, and they contribute mightily to our economy. They contribute to our culture around here. And there is the potential for some pretty ugly legislation to take effect Thankfully, a federal judge has put this ugly legislation on hold, or else it would have taken effect yesterday. But what we're trying to do is suggest that there are some ways that we can work around all of this. And perhaps these people who have done such a great job to have built businesses now that are contributing to our economy, if they're paying taxes, then they deserve to have driver's licenses. And we're trying to push that idea that these folks could have driver's license. It would reduce their anxiety as they drive around. But it also would contribute so much money to the pot that if the legislature would greenlight this, there are so many people who would then take advantage of it, we believe, and have, and then secure driver's licenses and then insurance for their cars, that all of our insurance rates would go down. So we're trying to have those kinds of conversations. Now, this is a cringy conversation, and we have made it a point to have people to come to those Latino conversations who are staunchly anti-immigrant. And what we put up in front of them are the stories and the testimonials of these people who are contributing, again, mightily to our culture, to our neighborhoods, to our economy. And so by the time they leave a Breaking Bread event that is about immigration, hopefully they have a couple of things. Hopefully they have the name and the face of somebody with whom they might disagree, maybe deeply, maybe vehemently, but a name or a face, and hopefully a lunch date, maybe a breakfast date, at least a coffee date where they can continue to have this conversation. And maybe both people on either side of a topic find a better place to stand and maybe even stand there together. And we deeply believe that as we figure out better places to stand together, that's where we can finally push some things along and create some change. So here's the last thing I would say. It's not enough, and this kind of makes a complete circle to what we said at the very beginning. It's great to talk, but the talk is not enough. The conversations have to be understood as a first step to something more, something greater, something deeper, something that would have more purchase with our larger society. And we're pretty good at getting people to our Breaking Bread events, somewhere between 250 and 300 at each event, who represent who knows how many people, because we get some nonprofit leaders, we get some elected leadership, we get some people of influence. So when we have 300 people in the room, maybe we're representing 10,000 or more people. And it doesn't take too long before you have enough people who can actually flavor a conversation. So here's kind of where we're headed from here. We have been primarily focused on the different ethnic corners of the city, and primarily focused then on the conversations that they suggest each corner of the city we should have, that has specifically to do with needed change within the criminal justice system. With Act Now's help, we're going to tune that a little bit, and we're going to ask a similar question. How can we come to your corner of the city and have a conversation about young people who might otherwise be casualties of the system? How might we better serve those people and then serve alongside those people to build better responses to a culture that is broken, to a system that is broken? And so this Opportunity Youth Focus is already underway. We think that the First American event in November will be our first that will shine a very bright light on how it is that First American young persons are victimized, and then how it is that they may be able to come alongside and help us build a better society for them and for everybody else. We also are going to have a discussion soon with Oklahoma City Public Schools, and come to find out just today that the district attorney wants to join in this discussion about how it is and why it is that young people miss school so often. We have a fresh batch of statistics around here that demonstrate that when young people miss school, especially the ones that miss school in a chronic sort of way, there is pretty much a pipeline from the kid who's truant for that kid, there's a pipeline from school or the lack thereof all the way into the criminal justice system. And so we want to have an Opportunity Youth, our first Opportunity Youth Breaking Bread, we think will be about truancy or absenteeism from school. And not only will we have the adults in the room, but we're going to work very hard to try to have some of these kids who struggle to get to school in the room. And we're going to ask them, how do you think we might be able to do something better or do something more often that will increase the percentage chance that we can get you to school and not only safeguard your present, but safeguard your future. So we're off and running and looking forward to what it is that we'll be able to do, building on what we've done in the past. Well, I'm a preacher, so I could just go on and on and on. So hopefully there's some questions out there. And Tanner, I can see that you have raised your hand.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Thank you, by the way. This is amazing. Like I've heard you share this a couple times already, and I just feel inspired every time I hear you talk about it. My questions are how questions.
Okay.
That I think can be helpful to, especially to individuals in justice circles and groups who are new to this. My first one is, if you were starting fresh in a new city, for example, like how do you find sponsors? Like how, like what are some of the tips maybe you would offer in terms of how to fund this?
How to fund it?
Yeah, partners, sponsors, things like that. Like where would you go looking? Like what conversations are you looking to have? How
Yeah.
would you?
Well, I'm glad my friend Lee is here because the hardest questions I'm just going to shuffle on to him, as I do in all the meetings as well. But I'll take a shot at this, Lee, and then I'll turn it over to you, okay? I think one of the things that happened at the outset is we started to look around to find the people who are doing the work. What I mean is, who are the people who are already serving, who are already working in some of these margins, and can we get those people together? Can we get together and start to develop some sense of team within those people, within that group of people who are already serving in these places? Now, it may be different in other places. Oklahoma City boasts a large number of nonprofit helping organizations. We just don't collaborate or communicate very well. And so what the Justice Circle is, and the way that we are kind of differentiated, I don't know how many different groups are out there saying, hey, what if all of us who are working on this project sat down together so that we could work more intelligently on this project? And then I don't know if this is groundbreaking, but once we found some of those people and we were able to sit around the table, everybody comes to the table with connections of some kind. And then those people who came around the table were willing to share some of those connections, talk to their own donors and sponsors to say, hey, might we be able to support this as well? We have some support from the Arnall Foundation. We have some support from the Inasmuch Foundation. Those are Oklahoma City specific foundations. But we had people around the table whose nonprofit organizations were supported by Arnall and Inasmuch. Kimray is another one. We had people around the table who were being supported. And so we asked the people who are already supporting things if they would support this. And that's how we have put together, and it's a humble sort of meager budget, but it is enough for us to continue to have these conversations. And having had enough of these conversations now, we were able to apply for another grant that does help, but that will help us to magnify what we're doing. Lee, what would you edit there? What would you add to that?
I would just only add to the fact that the group that chooses to invest in this work, that group's warm market is paramount, just as John mentioned. So the people that are a part of our Oklahoma City team, our warm connections, our warm relationships, and then their warm relationships have been, or not necessarily they're warm, but their connections have been probably the difference maker in the funding aspect for Oklahoma City. It's those relationships and connections, and from best we could tell, our diverse group hasn't had to labor very hard as they've leaned into their connections. this is worthwhile, this is needed work. We don't have to convince people that we have a problem. That's easy. That's easily done. So these people that want to be a part of the solution, I think there's some degree of, oh, let me help, let me have my name inscribed on that. Let me be a part of that. And John didn't mention Tanner, but some, good to see you, by the way. Some people have wanted to be a part of this, and we were like, our group was like, maybe not them right now, because we can be a little bit choosy now. We're trying to accomplish something here, and we don't want someone attaching themselves to this work that will polarize or will kind of diminish some of our progress.
Does that help, Tanner? I hope that's.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. I have one more question. I was thinking about your comments about these cringy questions, and in conversations we've had outside of this meeting too, it sounds like that's a kind of an essential part to a successful Breaking Bread event is setting the stage well, having everybody sitting at a table in a diverse setting where they're not just with the people they came with, they're with people with other perspectives. And then it sounds like you kind of lob these questions in, cringy questions that tee up conversation, and that's where the real, transformation and thinking starts to take place. Can you give some example? Like, I guess this is another how question. So if I were starting a new Breaking Bread and thinking, okay, so what questions do I want to pose? What's your process with the Justice Circle and coming up with those? How do you hit that sweet spot where it doesn't, set people off necessarily, and maybe it does, but is most productive for this conversation? And yeah, I guess just what's your process for prepping that? And then do you have any examples of a question that landed the way you were hoping it would and had the effect you were looking for?
So again, Lee needs to weigh in on this, because Lee has become sort of the litmus test for whether or not the questions are cringy enough, to be honest with you. But it does matter where we're headed for an event. So if we're headed to the Latino corner of our city, they've already told us what it is that they want to talk about. We tell them that we think that the secret sauce is part the meal that we're going to have together, and part the cringy questions that we're going to have together, because it's in that raw vulnerability that we think that the more impactful words are spoken, and we actually think that that's a better ground for a new friendship too, when we can kind of get that kind of real and raw around the table. So the process, to oversimplify, and again, I'm going to toss it to Lee here in a second, to oversimplify the process is, okay, tell us what you want us to talk about. Okay, given what it is that you want us to talk about, let's say immigration, here are some of my first blush shots at some questions, but you need to know that we really want to touch the open wound here. We want to touch the nerve here. And I go back to the people who are hosting us, so Brenda and Jorge. So what are these questions? And at times, they're going to want to ask questions that we haven't felt were cringy enough. Perhaps because in this one event I'm thinking about in particular, they were a little concerned about asking the kinds of questions and then having the kinds of answers with law enforcement in the room that might ultimately put somebody in some jeopardy. So that's how they described their hesitancy to us. But Lee was one of the people who looked at those questions and said that nobody is helped by these questions. And so Lee, kind of walk folks through your first blush reaction to those questions and why you had that reaction to the questions in their first form.
Sure. As John indicated, John, or one of us, or one of our team members, normally talks to the people in that community and kind of, okay, is this what you're saying? If they don't ask the question we don't think they're providing enough specificity to the question. So John usually will kind of ask them the question, then we vet those questions with a few of us. And so we are a diverse group, white, black, um, very this religion and that, and so we differ quite a bit. And so then we get a chance to kind of vet those questions. And we're trying, Tanner, to answer your question, we're trying to solve a problem. So if it just glosses over, then we're trying to take it just a level deeper so that we can provide some healing. We could provide some answers. People left there feeling like, oh, I knew something. I've shared it with Colleen and my husband. I'm losing her name right now. But there was a young lady in the video, young black lady. She said she was 28 years old, and she said, in my 28 years of, she was at my table. She said, my 28 years of living, of life, living in Oklahoma. She said, I learned more in an hour and a half about the Asian community. And so it was just profound to hear her share that testimony. So we want people to learn stuff, not just hear about, oh, what's fun, what's neat, what's exciting, what are you afraid of? And how does Oklahoma City, how do we take better care of you? And so we want them, Tanner, to answer your question, we want them to feel supported by the question that we ask. We don't want them to feel endangered by it, but we want them. And so when they see we're willing to push a little bit further, I believe it allows them, it causes them to feel that much more cared for and to want to be a part of this effort. But to sum it up, throw out some questions, give them some ballpark, and then we vet that with our team because we've done this rodeo before. And so it's not the first time. We know what we've gotten the feedback from previous groups. And so we always do a reflection of our event. Our next meeting, a portion of that is dedicated to that. What went wrong? What did we do well? And what do we celebrate? And thankfully, I don't know if you heard me, Tanner, thankfully, we can do more celebrating than we can do kind of grieving, oh my goodness, this messed up, whatever. So, because we've done it before.
So let me give you a couple of examples of some of the cringier questions that we've ever asked. So at our very first Breaking Bread, one of the questions was, when's the last time you thought about the color of your skin? What does the term white privilege mean to you? And how do you feel about the term white privilege? And obviously that question is aimed. At one of our Latino events, admittedly, we didn't ask good enough questions the first one. And some of that was because we were being very sensitive to how the Latino community felt about having this conversation in front of law enforcement. But at the second, so sometimes you do the first event so you can have the second event, if that makes some sense. And we have noticed that there is a depth and a richness and a texture to the second event that there wasn't to the first. And at the second event, we asked, are undocumented citizens as important as documented citizens? And there was an audible gasp in the room because we typically have Wayland, who's pretty good about standing up in front. This is another one of our Justice Circle members, and he's pretty good about being up front and pretty flippantly reading the question so that it can land and there can be an audible gasp. And so we've done that before. At the one that we had about gun violence, we asked the question, how do you feel when a white man walks into a room loaded with guns? And then how do you feel about a black man who walks into the room loaded with guns? And why is there that difference? And those are the kinds of questions that we feel like, I mean, and I don't think that they are simply cliche antagonistic questions. I don't think I don't think, Lee, that we try to do that just to poke the bear. What we're saying is these are the questions that we have to ask if by the end of this event we want to feel like we've been honest about this conversation. And if there is something that you just don't feel like you can ask at the Asian, I remember the question is, why are Asian people invisible to the greater Oklahoma City area? And what are the dangers associated with being invisible in the greater Oklahoma City area? And come to find out, they said that they have a whole generation of people who want to be invisible. And then they have a younger generation. So part of what happened at that event, we exposed that there was a pretty serious divide between the wishes of the older generation and the wishes of the younger generation. And the younger generation was willing to say, we understand why our parents and grandparents don't want to make waves, but now we're paying the cost, and the cost is community safety. I can only imagine what the questions might be at the First American event. I can only imagine. I know that there are some very strong voices who want to know if we are ready yet as a white dominant society to reckon with the reality of stolen lands. I mean, that's one of the ones that Sarah Adams Cornell wants us to ask and answer. And we'll see. Again, what we can't do is leave an event feeling like that we haven't had an honest conversation. Now, that doesn't mean, like we've already said, that doesn't mean that you don't have an eye toward the future. And I do believe that every time I feel like, Lee, every time that we have gone to a different place, the first event has been sort of introductory. So we had, at our first Latino event, we had a long video. It's like 17, 20-minute video to demonstrate that our Latino community is not monolithic. We have a Venezuelan, El Salvadoran, Mexican, and they're different, not just in terms of their stylings. They are different in terms of their points of emphasis and what they value. We did the same kind of thing the first time we went to the Asian community, had a recognition that we have a Vietnamese community and a Chinese, Japanese community, and they don't all believe the same things about the same issues. And so, but in our minds, at least, I mean, I think Lee and I are both pastors, and I think sometimes the pastors in the room say, hey, the first conversation we have is not going to be the last conversation we have. And so let's make sure that we recognize that we are building toward something. Like, we'd like to have even more, I don't know if dangerous is the right word, but raw conversations with the Asian community, and they just frankly haven't been ready yet. But they have some issues that are unique to the Asian community, and we are just building credibility with them until we can actually have this more dangerous conversation.
John, it seems like you've identified some leadership in each of these communities that have been able, or that you've chosen to allow to speak as the spokesperson for that identity. How do you do that? And does that take much digging, or are you is that pretty well known in the communities? Who speaks for the groups?
I do not pretend to know the people that Lee Rowland knows. And so when it first came to the most recent event that we had about philanthropic disparities in the Oklahoma City community. Specifically, we were having this conversation with the Northeast or African American part of our community, and I did not want to be put in the place of having to know who to ask about that. And so Lee and Wayland and Donna and other people around our table were much more credible voices. Now the problem happens, Kyle, when currently we don't have an Asian representative on our Justice Circle, and we should. That's something that we should address. We don't have a Native person on the Justice Circle, and we should. That's something else that we should address. So in the absence of that, I gather names from people around the the table there at the Justice Circle, and then I'll go buy the coffee and sit down with Sarah Adams Cornell and have her tell me who's doing the work. And then she'll help us to gather those people together. That's exactly how it happened with the Asian community. We got a name. The young lady in the video is the head of the Asian Cultural Society. And then by the time we sat down with her, and Lee and I sat down with her more than once, but she was also bending the ears of other people in her community who were also leadership. So the short answer is, Kyle, we assume that we don't know who is in the corners of our community. So we go asking people who should know and then trust their gut.
And I guess I hadn't appreciated the fact that what you call the Justice Circle is kind of a planning group that you're trying to have representatives from all of the different parts of the community, right? And so those, either you have it on your committee or they know how to go get it.
That's it. And to be completely honest, we're going through some growing pains now that we're a 501c3. You have to get organized, and in addition to the necessity of getting better organized legally, I think it's also imperative that we get kind of better organized spiritually. And by that I mean it's increasingly not okay to not have somebody from the Asian community. It's increasingly not okay to have somebody from the First American community, and that has proved to be a painful process. But I think that every time you take steps to order your steps in an administrative or a legal sort of way, and those steps are necessary, at times it can become even harder to maintain your spiritual identity and and I don't mean that in a Judeo-Christian necessarily sort of way. Hopefully it's inclusive of Judeo-Christian spirituality, but I mean that is in terms of, man, it's hard to maintain the purity of your aim and your focus. That's more what I mean. And so we're still working through that. And hopefully once we do, we'll look around the room and there will be people there who weren't there before, and probably there won't be some of us there who are there now, so that we can have a broader voice and a broader reach.
John, when you invite folks, I know you go after certain people, but is it also open to anybody that wants to come? How do you, and is there a targeted number you're going after? Are you going after trying to you've got 250 seats or whatever it is, and how much of those are curated by the group trying to go and select the people? How many of those are just kind of open to first come, first served?
Well, so at the beginning of our effort, Lee, I think we were better then than we are now at saying, okay, here's the question that we're going to discuss. We need to make sure that we have these folks who are on opposite sides of this issue come to this event. And we would shoot out 20, 30 invitations before we would open it up to the rest of the population. Now, we're enjoying a good problem right now. Once we put out a date, our events fill up. And so we're going to have about as many as we have seats. Now, we're not charging anybody, so you do lose some folks who haven't paid for anything. They don't really have any financial skin in the whole thing, and so they feel free to opt out. They have bad hair days and that kind of thing. So we're thinking about having registrations somewhere around 3 to 5% above our capacity, knowing that we always drop down maybe 10%, right? So for this First American event, I can imagine if we get back to our roots on that planning side, that we will send out 20 targeted invitations, then open it up for the other 280, because we have a 300 seat venue.
You'll try to get yeses from 330.
So, what's that? I'm sorry.
So you'll try to get 330 yeses, hoping that 300 will show up.
Yeah, somewhere in there. We'll, for lack of a better term, sell 315, 320 tickets. The first 20, 25 of which will be personal invitations to folks. And then we'll kind of let the chips fall. But right now, kind of in a hot streak. Am I missing anything, Lee?
Nope, nope, I think you're right on target.
Yes, sir. Tanner, I see that hand.
I have so many questions today. Two more. One of them's fairly short. I think the nature of a breaking bread event is making sure everybody has a voice. So question number one is, how big are your table groups that you have conversation between, and then how do you make sure that people who may feel unsafe sharing their honest perspective do have, I mean, you have an hour and a half for the whole event.
Yeah.
What do you do? What steps do you take? What tips do you have to make sure that they have a chance, that everybody has a chance to speak and be heard? And then my second question comes back to, you made a comment earlier about nervousness to speak honestly because there's law enforcement in the room. I think that's probably going to be a sentiment that everybody would feel across the board when you're asking hard questions like this. What tips and thoughts do you have to make it safe for everybody to feel like they can share openly?
Lee, if I take the first one, can you take that second one?
Yeah.
So because we believe that the discussions and those questions are the stars of the show, we try to prioritize time. But to give everybody a voice, we found that whereas we used to have 8 people per table, 1 facilitator and 7 participants, we're trying to bring that down to 6 because we are pressed for time. And if everybody's going to have a voice around the table, it's easier to get 6 people a voice, give 6 people a voice than 8 people a voice. So we're trying to pare that down to 6. Sometimes because of space, we have not been able to do that, but that's what we're trying to do. And then I do some training a day or two before, and we have mostly the same. We have very few new table hosts. Most of our table hosts are happy to go with us from event to event, but I'll still send out something akin to a training email that says, hey, you can't let somebody dominate. Here's a tip if somebody's trying to dominate. And hey, make sure that you announce ahead of time there's no cross talking. So there's not going to be an argument here. So I do a little bit of training, but as it has to do with safety, I think Lee is better wired to answer that question.
No, I think John basically answered it right there. That training that he provides, and then it's also stated for the table host, the instructions are the expectations for how they'll facilitate. It's right there in front of them, and so we just carefully, lovingly encourage table hosts, make sure that everyone feels safe, everyone is involved, nobody dominates. And so the luxury of having Donna, and everybody needs some form of Donnerism in their life, in their group, but the luxury of having people where you can't sit with your friends, or at least we discourage it and do everything we can to minimize it, and having a table host at each table. We have lots of just organic success. We got people from multiple, just all stations of life that are sitting together at these tables. And it just happens for us rather organically that these people eating want to share their thoughts and listen and whatnot. And so we've just had just remarkable success. And really, I think the questions that you are asking are very, very, very good questions. But for us, a lot of these things have solved themselves. So the question with law enforcement, we want to make sure that law enforcement is a part of the community. And so we state that up front. Waylon Cubitt, who is a career law enforcement person, he kind of tries to make, he's been one of he and John have typically opened and kind of set the stage. And so he is law enforcement himself. Black law enforcement. He says, I'm a dual citizen. I'm a Black man, and I'm a police officer. He's got dual citizenship. And I think it's important to make sure that law enforcement feels safe and protected in an environment where the Black community has not felt as warm towards them. And so we make sure that we're intentional up front. And we believe that we largely had success with law enforcement exiting the door feeling like I was heard, I was valued, while others, people that non-law enforcement felt the same way. So I think it's important, set up the expectations up front. Tanner, you are a young dad, got to talk to you. What I can tell anybody, and of course, you know, other gentlemen in the room know and whatever, but I've told teachers for years, if you set your expectations up front, it's much easier to have success with your students. But if we go mid-year and say, okay, now we're going to start doing it like this, you get your kids, Tanner. So you can extend curfew later. You can extend expectations later, but you can't take them back later from your kids. And just so you know, Tanner, kids today are really crazy, and yours are amazing, I know. But we can't. If we set them up front, most of the time, people will meet our expectations, if not exceed them.
That's a great point. I would say that Waylon has really helped us to make sure that we could fashion over the years a conversational relationship with the police department, including the leadership of the police department. They understand that if there's going to be a better society and a better system, it will be because we have these kinds of conversations. And we have had to before, we've had to say, hey, we would prefer you guys not come in your full regalia. If you could just come dressed like normal people and then sit with everybody, that'd be better. And sometimes they agree to that and sometimes they don't. But they do understand that the conversations are meant to better all of society. I try to talk them into, I have before tried to talk them into not being too defensive. There are times when officers overstep. And we had one at our Asian American event. Lee, you remember this, when that young lady got up and boy, she let the police department have it and they were not happy, but they came to the next event. So I think I think the whole thing, we've said the right thing about friendship and relationship, but it's also this conversation word. And there are lots of conversations that happen before the event, that happen long after the event, that are just as important as the conversations you have during the event. And one of the important conversations with us has been the one between us, the Justice Circle, and law enforcement all over the place. And so I would encourage anybody who's trying to have a discussion about community safety, about criminal justice, you need to make friends of somebody, hopefully somebody in leadership at your area law enforcement outlet, whether that be the police department or the county sheriffs or something like that. But you need to have an ally there, or else you can have all the conversations you want, and you may not take any ground.
John, I was going to mention that as well. In our meetings, we have asked the officers not to come in uniform.
Yeah.
And they have generally complied with that. Now, our events have been evening events, in a luncheon or a breakfast that might be harder for them, especially a luncheon where maybe that's mid-shift or something for them. And by the way, our officers are paid to come. I mean, they come on city time. I don't know if that's what happens in in Oklahoma City or not, but our officers are paid.
Yeah. I imagine that that's part of our issue too. There was one time it was really funny when a bunch of the chief's security detail came, but they weren't in uniform, but they were so obviously police and security that it was laughable. And we asked them to be less obvious, please, and to spread out around the room, and they did. They were good sports about the whole thing. It was the worst undercover job I'd seen in my entire life. But they were good sports and they jumped in and participated. Well, guys, we are at 3:03, which I think is all fair because I think we started at 2:03. So It is good to see you all again. I know Lee feels the same way. We're happy to
Absolutely.
continue the conversation. So if when somebody watches this recorded video in the future, if they have questions, hopefully, Tanner, can we put our contact information and whatever it is that they would access? Okay. All right. Thanks for coming, everybody. Hopefully we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Good to see you, Kyle. Shelley, good to see you. Yeah.